So this year I set out on a mission to find the worst racing games. And I'm not just talking about the obvious heavy hitters like big rigs, I'm talking about niche little hidden experiences like Final Drive Nitro. And to do this, I asked for your guys' help. Over the course of the last 36 episodes, you guys have recommended that I play over 100 different games, so there are plenty more episodes to come. But to bring this year to a close, I thought I would compile the worst of the worst that we've played this year. Your FlatOut 3s, your Burnout Legends DS. All of the worst games in the racing genre that have been covered by me this year in one long 2-hour video. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you're looking forward to many more racing games as we head into 2026. So without further ado, let's start with a real classic, FlatOut 3. Wow, Vin Diesel is in this game? Wait, no, that's Zin Benzin. Yeah, that's funny. FlatOut 3 released in late 2011 and was developed by Team 6 Game Studios. Most of the other games in the series up to that point were developed by Bugbear Entertainment, so there's already a warning sign for you. The game was published by Strategy First, which is ironic because they definitely didn't put strategy first when overseeing the development of this game. Anyway, whilst the vast majority of the series up to this point had been on console as well as PC, this was the first and only PC exclusive entry into the series. Okay, so let's look at the key features that they're advertising on the Steam page for this game. A physics engine capable of delivering over 20,000 fully destructible objects on every track. Wow. 47 vehicles with everything from muscle cars, monster trucks, tanks, bulldozers, and more? How can there be more? 9 game modes plus challenge mode that incorporates all game modes into one 62-track race. Boy, I can't think of anything worse. 10 racing environments with 62 different racetracks, as well as 3 stunt mode environments with 12 stunt tracks, 9 Destruction Derby battle environments, all new monster truck, night shift, off-road and speed modes, and I'm sure you can imagine how good all these new modes are. 8 multiplayer modes with support for up to 16 players. Good luck finding 15 other players to play this game with. Force feedback support for racing wheels, and I tried this. It was hell. Oh, I like how it feels when you turn, in that it feels like a fucking tank. Why is it so hard to turn? Oh yeah, by the way, the game just auto-accelerates. It just would not let my pedals work. So I'm just playing with the wheel and the game is accelerating for me. Oh my fucking god, just respawn. Larger destruction derbies with 24 players, complete chaos in off-road mode, complete destruction in all-new monster truck mode, and head-to-head in nightmarish, thunderous, rainy, fog weather in night shift mode. So they've basically just recreated England. So now we have an idea of what exciting things await you in FlatOut 3, let's talk about how the game actually works. Spoiler warning, it doesn't. So the way the cars handle in this game really are all over the shop. There is literally no consistency here whatsoever. Half the time it feels like your car has had lube rubbed all over the wheels and you've driven out onto an ice rink. And other times it suddenly feels like you're in the best downforce gripping car you've ever been in, to the point where it's overcompensating for all the sliding you've done beforehand. If I had one word to summarize the handling of cars in this game, it's jarring. It's very jarring because you just go from one extreme to the other, back and forth with no real indicator as to why. And this isn't just an isolated problem to one game mode or one class of car, this is across the board on the Formula 1 cars, the monster trucks, the muscle cars, the sports cars, everything just feels exactly the same. So let's work our way through these 9 fantastic modes and see what this game really has to offer. So let's start off with the most obvious choice with just your standard races. The races work, I guess. The AI go anywhere from Michael Schumacher in his prime to, well, Michael Schumacher now, and it's just ridiculous. AI drivers will either hurtle off around a corner into a wall, or they'll suddenly decide they're driving the McMurtry Spearling and floor it round a corner with maximum downforce and maximum speed. Track designs vary from irritating to just downright awful. The game boasts that there's up to 20,000 destructible things at once with its engine, and yet half the map doesn't seem to be destructible, and it's never clear what is and what isn't able to be destroyed. Sometimes you'll hit a fence, and it will shatter into pieces. Other times you'll hit it, and your driver will just cease to exist. And whilst we're talking about the race mode, we may as well just discuss the night shift mode as well, because it's literally the same thing, except they've just turned the vision down to 0. They basically just go, what if we had our races looking like early days of Silent Hill? It's rainy, it's foggy, it's exactly the same as the race mode, except you can just see less, but you still have the mini-map anyway, so it's not really that bad. It has all the same problems with handling, with physics. It's just even harder to see. They describe that game mode specifically as being nightmarish, but I would just apply that term to, like, the entire game. And finally, also on the topic of races, we have the speed mode, which is essentially just racing, but Formula 1 kind of. Yes, I suppose it does feel fast, but again, it's just another ice rink simulator. I really tried hard to find a game mode or literally anything in this game that I could enjoy. Like, I know the review scores for this game on Steam are notoriously low, but I thought there's got to be something redeeming in this game. And I'm really struggling to think of anything. The stunt mode makes a return in FlatOut 3, and whilst the stunts have always been, let's face it, somewhat janky, but definitely very fun, in here they are just incredibly janky and no fun whatsoever. I tried to spend the same amount of time on each game mode so that I could give a justifiable opinion on each one, without sounding biased of my first experience being tarnished. But with stunt mode, after playing it for literally about 15 to 20 minutes, I knew I'd already seen all that it had to offer, and it was just really annoying. Okay, so next up we have the Monster Truck mode, and this is one of their big new modes that they've been featuring on the Steam page. You get to pick from a few different monster trucks, then you get put into an arena, and your objective is to simply just find the objects it's telling you to and destroy them before everyone else does. That's pretty much it. It's not really like monster truck modes in certain other games where you get score for doing cool tricks, wheelies, flips, stuff like that. You just drive around a fairly generic map and smash into things. Again, all the trucks handle like shit, the AI act like complete morons, and the whole thing is just incredibly unfun. Now, whilst we're on the topic of more off-roady stuff, let's talk about the off-road game mode. Now, initially, it was very unclear what the actual objective of the off-road mode was, because there's just markers you drive to, and at first it feels like you're in a race, but it isn't actually a race. It's entirely based on score, so based on drifts, how much you smash into the environment, how much you smash into other drivers, and airtime. I struggled to do a single drift because I just couldn't get the game to cooperate with me, so I had to settle for airtime and just smashing into stuff, whether it was intentional or not. It's incredibly easy because you don't need to race ahead, you can just zigzag around, smash into things, and then you win. The first time I played it, I didn't even know how to play, and I just won anyway. To be honest, my biggest criticism of the off-road mode is that it's very unclear where you're actually meant to go next, because the markers are not very clear. The markers are made of very faint smoke that tend to blend into the background of the level that they're in, so it's quite easy to take a wrong turn or go the wrong way, so the best thing to do is just hang back and watch the AI do it and just follow them instead, if they don't crash. Now, technically there are 3 game types remaining, but I would say there's only 2. There's 2 different types of Demolition Derby, one with less players and one with more players, but they call that 2 different game modes, which I think is ridiculous. The demolition in this game is just outright unfair. You'll ram cars at full speed and it will do more damage to you than it does to them. It's just very inconsistent. Sometimes you hit something and it's like a one-hit kill, other times you do 1% damage. Incredibly inconsistent, not very entertaining, and all the AI just target you, even if there's plenty of other racers to go for. Now, the final game mode I want to talk about before we move on to the visuals and design is a mode where you have to run over zombies. On paper, this should be the most entertaining thing ever, but it isn't. It tries to capture the vibes of games like Zombie Highway for mobile that came out a year prior, but does so incredibly unsuccessfully. The lighting in all these maps is absolutely atrocious, and the default camera setting, when you hit a zombie, it tends to get stuck inside your car, and the splatters from the zombies take up most of the screen, so you just have these red marks on your screen and a zombie blocking most of the way, so you can't really see where you're going. I think the biggest problem that the game modes of FlatOut 3 have is that they're all incredibly undercooked. Instead of just focusing on a couple of good game modes, like just having a decent race mode, a decent demolition derby, and working on the stunt mode from the previous games, they've just overstuffed it with a bunch of half-baked ideas that are really glitchy and incredibly boring. Another issue that this game had was that FlatOut was quite a prestigious title at the time. You had FlatOut 1, 2, and the enhanced Ultimate Carnage before this came out. It was well beloved, it was entertaining, so you would think they would have allotted the budget and time and care that a series like this required. And I will find it forever baffling that both the developer and the publisher looked at this and went, yep, that's perfect, let's put it on sale. Now let's discuss the visuals and design of FlatOut 3. Now, normally I'm not one to fault a game on visuals if the game itself is actually fun, but when the game is as painful and as boring as this, it's not even pretty to look at. This has got to be one of the ugliest 2011 racing games out there. It goes from being anywhere from way too dark to way too oversaturated in the space of one single straight on a track. The character models, whilst not the focus of the game, are hideous. The car models themselves are okay. They vary from being average to just downright awful. I don't like to normally compare, but let's just read out some good racing games that came out in 2011, because oh boy, it was a banging year. We had Forza Motorsport 4, Dirt 3, Cars 2, Driver San Francisco, Need for Speed Shift 2, Mario Kart 7, and MotorStorm Apocalypse, which is somewhat similar to FlatOut. Every single one of those games are very entertaining because they were given the time and care that they deserved from their developers. As well as ugly in-game visuals, I have to say the menu design is just atrocious as well. It looks incredibly tacky and like it was designed by a toddler. On top of this, the music in this game is just god-awful. FlatOut 2 had a really banging classic 2000s soundtrack featuring songs from Fall Out Boy, Nickelback, Yellowcard, Audioslave. There was just so much going on here, and it was iconic, like the Burnout series as well. This is just some of the most generic, almost AI-generated sounding music I've ever heard in my entire life. It's basically just heavy metal elevator music. It is awful. The game as a whole just feels like Team 6 did not care remotely about the FlatOut franchise. There is no effort put in here in graphics, in gameplay, in variety, in the soundtrack. The whole thing is just a painful pile of slop. If I had to try and give some praise to this game for anything, I guess I could say there's a decent variety of cars and a decent variety of characters to play as, even if they are all completely unfunny and very ugly. I mean, what? Xmas 2011? What? FlatOut 3 to racing games is what Lance Stroll is to F1. A complete and utter joke. Anyway, FlatOut 3 Chaos and Destruction would go on to reach a 23 out of 100 on Metacritic, with pretty much all negative reviews and like 1 or 2 mixed reviews, along with a user score slightly higher with a 3.7 out of 10. Now, as far as I can see from looking around, FlatOut 3 never received a physical PC release, so there was no disc, only digital. And because of this, I haven't really been able to find a reliable sales figure for this game. VG Charts states about 125,000 copies were sold, but various sources for SteamDB quote figures from 190,000 all the way up to about 250,000. But what we do know is that the game had a peak player count of 47 players at one time. Oh man, that is rough. So now we have to rank FlatOut 3 in our worst racing games tier list. Honestly, there's no other slot for this game except pure evil. It's not entertaining enough to be in the so bad that it's actually kind of good category. It is just downright terrible. There is no redemption for this game at all. You know what's faster than a snail? Literally everything. But back in 2013, DreamWorks decided that a snail could be fast enough to star in a summer blockbuster, and be voiced by Ryan Reynolds. Turbo. And like every animated movie from the early 2010s, Turbo didn't just come with a toy line, a Netflix spin-off and a fast food tie-in, it also came with a licensed video game. Well, actually, it came with several. Today we're talking about the Nintendo DS version of Turbo Super Stunt Squad, the game that somehow manages to make racing snails slower than real ones. So before we get into the gameplay, I'm going to start off with a little bit of history about the game and the timing of its release. By 2013, the DS was basically on life support. The shovelware flood was at full speed. The 3DS had already been out for 2 years at this point, and publishers like D3 and developers like Taurus Games were cranking out licensed games faster than Turbo himself could ever dream of moving at. It wasn't uncommon to see the same title released across multiple platforms: Wii, 3DS, Xbox 360, all with wildly different versions. And that's the case here. So the Wii, 3DS and DS ports of Turbo Super Stunt Squad were developed by Taurus Games, who are notorious for cranking out licensed titles for different properties such as Rise of the Guardians, Spider-Man, and Scooby-Doo. The game was also released on Wii U, PS3 and Xbox 360, and this was developed by Monkey Bar Games and was a different game entirely. So when you first boot up the game, you're greeted by the title screen being read out loud by Snoop Dogg.
Turbo! Super Stunt Squad, baby! Coming at you.
That's it. No story, no intro, just Snoop Dogg saying the game's title. Because that's right, Snoop Dogg reprises his role from the film, and he's one of only 2 voice actors to do so, alongside Ben Schwartz, who you may know as the movie Sonic the Hedgehog. Anyway, aside from this one voice line, it's just a static logo and the word START, which is already a red flag. There's basically zero effort to connect the game to its source material. I mean, hey, I'm pretty sure even the B-movie game managed to shove in a few cutscenes, but Turbo, he gets a JPEG image. The menus look like something straight out of a Flash game. There's no flair, no music that makes you feel like you're in a racing world, just generic looping background noise. And there's no story mode either, so if you haven't seen the film, and for some reason decided to buy this game, good luck understanding why these snails are drifting through taco restaurants. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, or in this case not so great racing games, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with the worst racing games series. And whilst you're at it, if you want to support this series or the channel further, then please check out my Patreon using the link in the description below. Over on Patreon you can get access to some cool goodies like early access to videos and your name in the credits of every single release. It would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, enough plugging the channel, let's go back to some Turbo Super Stunt Squad. So how does Turbo actually play? In theory, it's a simple kart racer. You pick a snail, pick one of 3 cups, and race through a handful of tracks. You accelerate, you brake, you try to drift around corners. It's pretty standard stuff. But the moment you try to turn, you realise that something is deeply, deeply wrong. The controls feel like you're steering through superglue, which is ironic because the whole point of this game is to feel fast. Drifting feels uncontrollable when it actually decides to work, and it's almost impossible to make tight turns without either flying off the track or just hitting into the corner. And don't worry, no, the game knows you're going to do this. That's why the devs decided to add a dedicated respawn button. That's not a feature of good design, ladies and gentlemen, that's just a panic button. Even worse though, the physics make no sense. Sometimes you'll clip through walls, other times you'll just fall into the void for no reason. It's like the game's gravity system forgot it was supposed to be consistent. This is the kind of game where half your race time is spent recovering from the last mistake the game made for you. Now, visually, this game is rough. Even for a late DS game, this looks quite bad. The textures are flat, the colours are muddy, and the environments all blend together. When the frame rate tanks, and it will, a lot, it's usually because more than 2 things are happening on screen at once. That's right, the DS can handle full Mario Kart DS matches at a solid frame rate, but Turbo Super Stunt Squad drops frames like it's allergic to movement and snails. and I would be willing to bet money that the 3DS version is exactly the same, except with a 3D slider that probably doesn't even really work for this game. Yikes. So let's talk about the racers. You get a small handful of snails from the movie, but they all control the same. There's no difference in speed, weight, or handling, just different shells that claim to affect those stats. Although having tried pretty much every shell that Turbo has, it made no difference whatsoever. And if you were hoping for character banter or personality, prepare for disappointment. The only flavour these snails have comes from one-liners that repeat every 10 or so seconds, and half the time they barely even make sense to what's going on.
Not bad, Garden Snail.
Turbo, that is hot!
After about 2 races, if that, you'll wish you could mute them, but unfortunately, that's not an option. Here's where the title becomes false advertising though. Super Stunt Squad, there are exactly 4 stunts. When you go off a ramp, you press a direction on the D-pad, and that's it. Each direction gives you a different item: a tomato to grow in size, taco shells for defense, a pepper shaker for offense, and a boost. There are no combos, no timing system, no risk or reward, just one press and 2 possible results. One where you land the trick, and one where the game bugs out and sends you flying.
Yeah! Well, alright!
Now, to be honest, there's absolutely no point using any of the other items in this game except the boost. The tomato allows you to break through parts of the environment that have tomato symbols on them, the taco shells didn't work for me once as no one ever attacked me anyway, and the pepper shaker seemingly does nothing. So the boost is your best option, just fly off in front and keep the lead. It's the easiest way to play the game. And no matter which snail you pick from, they all perform the exact same 4 stunts. It's basically a power-up system disguised as a stunt feature. I mean, the damn banana peels from Mario Kart feel more dynamic than the entire stunt and item mechanic in this game. It's just ridiculous. The one shining glimmer of creativity here though, is the track design. They're set in everyday environments, a kitchen, a restaurant, a back garden, but scaled up to make the snails feel tiny. On paper, that's quite clever. Racing across a taco counter or up the wall of a diner does sound quite fun. But in execution, everything looks exactly the same. The camera angle doesn't help at all, the environments lack any detail, and it's hard to tell what's the track and what's background. Genuinely, some of these tracks are so poorly designed, I got confused about where I was supposed to go. Even when the concept does shine through briefly, the performance and the visuals just drag it right back down. So the game has a measly 3 cups to offer, and some extras like time trials, and when you complete those 3 cups, a mirror mode, where you can play the same awful tracks, but this time in reverse. And that's it, really. There's no online multiplayer, no local play, not even download play, which for a kart racer on the DS, just feels borderline criminal. There are a few unlockable shells, as I mentioned, for each racer that slightly tweak handling, but they're hardly worth the effort, because those supposed tweaks have like no impact on the gameplay whatsoever. So once you've seen all 3 cups, you've basically experienced the entire game. And by the way, you can complete those 3 cups in less than an hour. If you start this game at the same time as watching the Turbo film, you will literally finish the game before the film ends. That is absolutely criminal. To be fair, Turbo Super Stunt Squad wasn't just on DS. The console versions, such as the 360 and PS3, as I said, are completely different games. More like skate park stunt games than racers. And while they weren't good either, at least they tried to do something distinct. The DS version though, it's like the team got halfway through building a Mario Kart clone, and just went, that'll do, and just called it a day. It's a time capsule of an era when every animated film had to have a game, no matter the quality or context. Now, in terms of critical response, none of the tourist-developed versions of this game have enough reviews to generate a Metacritic score. but the 3DS version, which is the same as the DS version, has 3 different reviews. The official Nintendo magazine gave it 21 out of 100, Pocket Gamer UK gave it 30 out of 100, and Nintendo Life were much more generous, with a 40 out of 100. But that would have put this in a very negative review bracket for its meta score. Now in terms of sales figures, the game didn't really do that well either, with the DS version specifically only shifting about 40,000 units, and this is per VG charts. So now the time has come to rank Turbo Super Stunt Squad on our worst racing games tier list. Now for me, there was no other place this could fit in other than so bad it's good. I mean, this is a DS racing game where you race snails, and one of them's voiced by Snoop Dogg, but it's also completely broken. How could I put it in any other tier? It's just, oh god. Anyway, Turbo Super Stunt Squad definitely isn't the worst DS racer ever made, but it's definitely not good either. There's potential buried underneath all the clunky controls and flat visuals. The concept of tiny snails racing through everyday environments is genuinely quite good, but it's all squandered by poor execution, lack of polish, and absolutely no connection to what made the movie kinda work. If you're a kid who just watched the film in 2013, maybe you'd get a kick out of it for an hour or two, but for everyone else, this is just another casualty in the long line of rushed license games. Back in the early 2000s, the street racing boom was in full swing. Games like Need for Speed Underground and Midnight Club were lighting up the PS2. And then there was RPM tuning. Released in 2004, it tried to ride the trend with customizable cars, a dramatic story, and a taste of underground culture. But does it deliver a hidden gem, or is it just stuck in neutral? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So before we jump into the gameplay, let's just go over a bit of history about the game. So RPM tuning is also known as Top Gear RPM tuning, as it's part of the Top Gear game series, not to be confused with the television series of the same name.
Oh no! Anyway,
it also eventually saw a release on Windows under a completely different name. Midnight Outlaw 6 Hours to Sun Up, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, RPM tuning had a bit of a weird release timeline, as it first released on the PS2 in November of 2004, but only in Europe. It never saw a release outside of Europe on the PS2. Eventually, in February of 2005, America would get an Xbox port, and in June 2005, Europe would get an Xbox port. And then as well as this, the Windows version launched exclusively in North America on the 4th of March 2005. The game was developed by a French studio called Babylon Software, who to this day only have 2 different credits to their name, one of them being RPM tuning, and the other being Furious Karting for the original Xbox back in 2003. Most versions of RPM tuning were published by a French publisher called Wanna-Do Edition, but the North American Xbox release was published by Kemco, and the PC version was published by ValueSoft. Anyways, just for reference, the version of the game that you're seeing in this video today is the PlayStation 2 release. So right off the bat, RPM tuning doesn't really make the best first impression. Look at this horrible start menu. The image doesn't even stretch to the 4:3 aspect ratio. There's just a bit of the background around the start menu. It just looks so tacky. And yes, it continues this way. The menus are clunky, they're confusing, and they're just horribly designed. Navigation feels like it was slapped together at the last minute. Sometimes you're not even sure if your selection's registered until something finally loads. Once you actually press start, it looks even worse because you have this horrible bar that just covers up a bit of the image, but once again, it doesn't stretch across the whole screen, just the actual picture. It's just not a good first impression at all. So you've got a few different options before you jump properly into the game. You've got Quick Race, Adventure, and then Tune and Race. So the bulk of this video will be covering the Adventure mode, or basically the game's story mode, because I wouldn't say it's much of an adventure. So the game does feature a full story starring a man named Vince, who you'll be playing as. He is a street racer trying to climb to the top of the scene specifically so that he can find out who stole a car and where that car is. Now, it's not that deep, but on paper it's actually cool. Story-driven racing games were quite rare at the time, and giving players more than just win races by parts is a neat idea. But then the execution hits you. The translation is rough, sometimes hilarious, sometimes baffling. Subtitles don't even sync with the speech, and the voice acting is the kind of cringe that turns the game into unintentional comedy gold. If you love awkward cutscenes, you're in for a treat, because these characters are hilariously charismatic.
Elementary, baby, cause we ain't been officially introduced yet. My name's Mag.
My name is...
We're the same, you and me. I feel it, man. We're fighting for the same thing, bro. Dollar signs, baby. Flow, skrilla bling. And that's cool.
Anyway, now the stage has been set for the story, what is the game actually like? Well, in terms of controls, it's just fairly standard stuff. You've got two different control layouts, pretty much as standard for the PlayStation 2, and that's accelerating with X or accelerating with the right analog stick, and then braking with square or braking with the right analog stick. You steer with the left, look behind you with triangle, and you can use R1 to boost. Fairly straightforward controls, so what is it like? Well, once you hit the streets, the gameplay really does show its flaws. The car handling feels incredibly stiff, but also incredibly slippery, and just wrong. Now, there is an upgrade system that does affect your handling, and we will get into that later, but as a blanket statement for most of the game, the handling just doesn't feel right. But whilst the handling might not feel right to you, the player, it feels so much worse for the AI, because at least you can learn and adapt to it, but this AI will just crash and crash time and time again. Most of the time, they drive like they're half asleep, other times it will just rubber band you so hard, you feel like the race is scripted against you. There were just so many moments in the story that were just unintentionally hilarious, because a character had told me in a cutscene before the race how good they are, how much better they are than me, and then within the first 10 seconds just crashed into a wall or into an oncoming car. And don't even get me started on the plot armor that some of these characters have throughout the story. The girl on the cover of the game, Carmen, genuinely is in like the most horrific crash I've seen in a long time, and she is completely unharmed. Totally ridiculous.
Don't move. We're taking you home.
So, throughout your time with the story of RPM tuning, you will be able to play a few different event types. Not as many as we've seen in other racing games at the time, but still a few nonetheless. There are standard lap-based races, which will be between 2 to 4 laps. Then you have point-to-point races, which is just one long stretch of road, typically without any checkpoints in the middle, just the start and the end. There are a few time trials scattered throughout the story, and a couple of moments where you have to outrun the cops, but it's incredibly easy. I think the most time I spent doing a cop chase was probably about 20 seconds. And then, as well as this, there are multi-race championships. The championships are shown off in a way that you can score points no matter which place you come, but here's the kicker. In these championships, you can't just place consistently to win based on points. No, you have to win every single race. If you mess one up, you have to go back to the start. It's a really baffling design choice that kills any sense of progression or strategy in these championships. I mean, thankfully, the game is very easy, so it's not really a problem anyway, it just seems like a really stupid, lazy piece of design. Anyway, the word tuning is right there in the title, so you'd expect some deep customization, right? Well, sort of. The game does offer fairly in-depth options for both the exterior and interior of your car. Paint jobs, spoilers, body kits, and then nitro, different engine upgrades, different brake upgrades, so on and so forth. There is plenty there. And honestly, that's one of the game's biggest strengths. What I also like is that when you do add different body kits, it's not just a cosmetic. There is actually a performance boost, such as increased downforce, and you'll also get something called fame. The issue is the game doesn't really explain fame to you whatsoever, it just kind of starts telling you that you're getting it, but doesn't tell you what it actually does. Well, what it does is it creates a multiplier so you earn more cash at the end of each race, and for every bit of kit you install, every engine upgrade, there is a bit of fame to go with it, and you'll also earn this from winning races, performing overtakes, so on and so forth. It just doesn't tell you that. And that's really a problem with this game across the board. You're changing parts, you're spending money, but the results just aren't really clear. The game doesn't really feel the need to tell you anything. Why is it there? What does it do? Who knows? RPM tuning doesn't want to tell you. Now, in terms of its visuals, RPM tuning also struggles. The environments are frankly quite bland, the city feels empty, and even the car models lack the polish you'd expect, although at least they look kind of okay. But this is a game that has a heavy emphasis on nightlife and the street racing scene, and just the nightlife and the city at night just don't feel alive at all. It's just a boring backdrop that you'll be sliding around under poor handling. And sadly, the sound design doesn't really do it any favours either. The engines sound kind of flat, and the soundtrack just is generic rock and techno that wears out its welcome very quickly. Because when you're doing a race, it will just play a song at random, but then the song will just loop. It won't move on to another song in that race, it will just play the same one over and over again. Now, I get that there weren't many songs to choose from to begin with, but just play all of them on a shuffle. I don't just need the same song on loop. Now, to the game's credit, there is a certain charm in how bad it is. The poor dialogue, the broken subtitles, the over-the-top cutscenes, and just everything comes together into a big, cringy, hilarious mess. If you enjoy laughing at awkward PS2 era storytelling, you'll find plenty of it here. And I did find weirdly as I played through the game there was a kind of strange charm to it, even if everything was janky. Now let's look at RPM tuning through a critical lens. Let's see how it holds up in terms of its review scores. Well, on Metacritic there isn't actually a review score for the PS2 version, but the Xbox version of the game holds a generally unfavourable score of 45 out of 100, and doesn't have enough user ratings to even get a user score to begin with. With critics saying it's a half-competent game, but just not one that could compete in the current market. It's a game that's worthy of a rental, but not actually buying. Which I can agree with to an extent, because there is fun to be had here, mostly from the laughable cutscenes, but with some decent customization, it does have that redeeming factor to it. Now, I took to VG charts to see if I could find any sales figures for the PS2 version of this game, but there aren't any available. If you were interested, apparently the Xbox version only sold about 20,000 units, which doesn't really surprise me. So then I thought I'd check price charting to see if the game was worth a lot because it was rarer, but if you want a complete copy with box and manual, it's worth about £4.80. So not very much. So now the time has come to rank RPM tuning, or Top Gear RPM tuning, on our tier list of worst racing games. Now, with those horrendous cutscenes and cringy dialogue, for me this game is just so bad that it's actually kinda good. Yes, I had a good time, but I didn't have a good time because the game is actually good, it's just broken and funny. At the end of the day, this game is just a fascinating mess. It tries to offer a cinematic story, deep customization, and competitive street racing, but pretty much stumbles in every area. Horrible menu design, unresponsive driving, inept AI, and confusing progression drag the whole thing down. The positives, well, as I say, the customization is surprisingly detailed, and just having a story, even if it's not great, in a racing game is always a fun idea. There's just no good execution. If you're a hardcore collector of obscure PS2 titles, RPM tuning might be worth a laugh. But if you're looking for a solid street racing experience, stick with those heavy hitters like Need for Speed Underground or Midnight Club.
Monochrome Racing. The game that dares to ask, what if colour was optional and fun was a luxury? When you first see this game, you might think, hey, that looks kinda cool. A top-down racing game with a stylish black and white aesthetic. Maybe it's like Micro Machines, and yeah, that's what I thought too. And then I played it. And now I understand what true despair tastes like. So Monochrome Racing released on the PSP in August of 2011. It also released on Nintendo Wii as a WiiWare title that same month. It was developed and published by a Lithuanian video game developer called Nordcurrent. Nordcurrent is a developer who somehow managed to make an entire career out of reminding us why quality assurance exists. They're the same masterminds behind the 101 in 1 Megamix, and a few different varieties of that same title that released in the DS and the Wii and a few other platforms back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Basically, they just produce technically, yes, these are video game experiences. So when I saw Monochrome Racing, I figured, okay, top-down cars, a minimalistic look, maybe it's a neat arcade throwback at the very least. Spoiler alert, it's not. The premise is weirdly simple. You and 3 other cars drive on a black and white road, trying to reach the finish line or push each other off screen. Think Micro Machines head-to-head mode, but with all the charm, physics, and fun surgically removed. The name Monochrome Racing isn't just a description of the visuals, it's a warning, because every single aspect of this game feels drained of colour, energy, and soul. So after you boot the game up, it asks you to create a profile, which is adorable because it assumes you'll want to keep playing long enough to have any progress. Anyway, it showed me a variety of different characters I could select as my profile picture, because that's literally all they are. They don't have any personality, description, it's just a picture that you choose. So I went with this interesting looking guy and went on with my day. You're then tossed into career mode, where you have to choose from a lineup of cars that all look like someone fed clip art silhouettes into a blender. There are 12 vehicles in total, and you unlock them as you progress through the career mode, and then you have to buy them with the currency that you earn by completing events. They all have upgrades that feel about as meaningful as rearranging your couch cushions in a burning house. So you start with some cash, and after each race you earn more. In theory. In practice, it doesn't matter, because winning races is so absurdly easy that you could literally tape down the acceleration button and still come out on top near enough every single time. Now, the career mode also features over 80 tracks, which sounds great until you realise they all look like slightly different variations of the same track that have all been drawn by a toddler just scribbling on some paper who's also never seen a car turn before. Each race takes about 30 seconds to realise you've made a terrible mistake. Not because you're losing, but because you're winning, and it means you'll have to play another one. I'm not kidding when I say some races lasted less than 15 seconds. What's the point in even playing the game if the gameplay loop lasts less than 15 seconds? But here's the big problem. The handling. Imagine trying to steer a shopping cart full of bowling balls on a frozen lake while your hands have been coated in butter and oil. That's clearly the inspiration the devs of Monochrome Racing had. Every car oversteers like it's allergic to the concept of traction. Tap the stick a little too hard and your car spins out like it just saw a ghost. And the AI? They handle even worse. Watching them try to navigate a turn is like watching toddlers learn how to walk near a cliff. Half the time they crash into walls, each other, or even themselves. Sometimes they even turn around and start driving the other way. I don't know if it's an AI bug or if they're just having an existential crisis, but either way, it's somehow the most entertaining part of the game. This might have been forgivable if this game in inverted commas, had anything else to offer. Some variety, some clever track design, maybe even a fun weapon system. But nope, the weapons are as lazy as the rest of the package. You get 2, a bomb and a mystery circle thing. Cool, I guess. The circle is some kind of slowdown bubble you can drop behind you, except the AI is usually so bad they'll crash into walls before even reaching it, so like, who cares, what's the point? Okay, so now you might think, well, maybe it's a dumb little party game that's meant to be played with friends. Which sounds great on paper, but there's no multiplayer in the PSP. It's just the career mode. I believe the WiiWare version does have multiplayer, but I've not tested that myself. But in career mode, it's a joke. The races end after a single win, the AI barely functions, the only way you'll lose is if one of their random death spirals blocks the road and you accidentally join the car pileup. And that did happen to me a few times, and it was quite frustrating, but only frustrating because I knew that I was going to have to restart and keep playing this game. There's no challenge, no tension, no sense of competition, Just the creeping realization that you're spending an afternoon beating an AI that can't tell left from right. It's not that the game's easy, it's just fundamentally broken. And it's the kind of broken that's not even funny after the third race. It's just sad. Between races, you're greeted by menus that make Windows 98 look futuristic. Every option requires an extra button press for literally no reason, which means you end up spending as much time navigating menus as you do actually racing. It's almost poetic in a way. You bought a racing game and the most challenging part is the user interface. Now, visually, the game's monochrome style could have been quite cool. Black and white environments, cars glowing in bright primary colours, there's potential there. It's got this minimalist vibe that could have looked stylish, like an art project about racing. But instead, it feels completely unfinished. The contrast is so harsh sometimes, it makes it hard to even see the road, especially on a PSP screen. But enhanced on a computer screen, it still looks like total ass. And when everything looks the same shade of grey sadness, it's easy to lose track of where you are. The soundtrack are generic loops that sound like the free music that came with Windows Movie Maker. Each race feels like listening to elevator music during a fire drill. Sound effects are equally uninspired because the cars all sound like vacuum cleaners that gave up on life. There's no sense of speed, no adrenaline, just a droning noise that reminds you how long these races actually feel. On top of this, there's not even wheel animations for the top down, just tiny little animations on the images would have made it look just a little bit more polished. But no, you've basically got 4 different coloured JPEGs all in a low resolution, driving around the track. That's what this game boils down to. The saddest part of this whole ordeal is, the idea could have worked. The whole push your opponent off-screen concept was amazing in the old Micro Machines games. It created these intense, frantic moments where one wrong move could cost you the match. That risk-reward tension made it exciting. But Monochrome Racing takes that same idea, beats it up and buries it under lazy AI, boring tracks, and mechanics that punish precision instead of rewarding it. It's like watching someone take your favourite childhood game and reimagine it as a punishment in hell. I mean, the nicest thing I could probably say is, performance-wise, it's fine. It runs at a stable enough frame rate, but considering what's on screen, 2-dimensional blobs sliding on grayscale roads, that's the bare minimum. Load times aren't long, thankfully, and honestly, that's about as much niceness as I've got. At a certain point, you start to question, who is this game even for? For kids? No, too boring. Adults? Nah, too broken. Masochists? Possibly? It feels like Nordcurrent saw Micro Machines and thought, yeah, but what if we made that worse, and then somehow overshot the target? It's not even so bad it's good, it's just so bad it's numbing. The kind of game that doesn't even make you angry after a while. You just stare at the screen like you're watching paint dry on a car you don't own. There's no personality, no charm, no ambition, just a grey void filled with cars that hate physics and AI that hates you. And themselves. Now on the plus side, this wasn't an expensive game. This cost about $5 on release on the PSP, or 500 points on the original Wii store. See, you could have bought this, or you could have bought an NES Classic on Virtual Console, and that would have been better. I mean, hell, even original Excite Bike feels more advanced than this. How do they manage that? It's just ridiculous. So now the time has come to rank Monochrome Racing on our worst racing games tier list. And if you couldn't tell from my very positive attitude this video, there is no other space on this tier list other than pure evil for Monochrome Racing to belong in. This has got to be one of the worst games I've ever played in my entire life. It's fundamentally broken, it's incredibly boring, it looks ugly, and its only saving grace is at least it doesn't cost that much, so that you wouldn't have lost loads of money buying this crap in the first place. I mean, even the critic reviews reflect this. There aren't any for the PSP version, but the Wii version currently holds a 25 out of 100 on Metacritic, with low review scores as low as 0. That's how bad this game is. Monochrome Racing on the PSP is one of those games that feels like it exists purely to make you appreciate better games. It's the diet version of a bad idea, all the taste of disappointment but with none of the flavour of fun. And yet, part of me respects it. Not because it's good, oh god no, but because it commits to being awful with such conviction. It doesn't just dip its toes into mediocrity like we normally see in this series, it cannonballs straight first into it, screaming, "Look Ma, I made a game." Like, I just don't understand how this could have possibly got past any kind of quality assurance.
What happens if you take the first few Burnout games and cram them onto a DS console? Well, this happens. So yes, today we are playing Burnout Legends, specifically Burnout Legends for the DS, because the PSP version is actually a good game. So the Nintendo DS version was developed by Visual Impact, published by EA, and released across November and December of 2005. Now, it's interesting to note that Visual Impact actually had a history of developing racing games for Nintendo's previous handheld consoles, the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color, with games such as Corvette, Taxi 2 and 3, MotoGP, and Suzuki Extreme Racing. Their Game Boy Advance outings actually had some fairly decent 3D visuals for that console, but unfortunately it kinda just looks the same on the DS in Burnout Legends. So what is Burnout Legends? Well, Burnout Legends is essentially a culmination of the first 3 Burnout games crammed onto a handheld console. Now on the PSP this works very well, and in fact the PSP has many more maps than the DS version does. So Legends primarily pulls maps from Burnout 2 and 3, but does have a map from Burnout 1 as well. Although in terms of the actual gameplay, it was essentially designed to play exactly the same as Burnout 3 Takedown, which up to that point was the most successful game in the series. Now the main game mode in Burnout Legends is of course again the World Tour, which can be broken down into 7 different game types. Now before we get into each of those, we first need to discuss the actual handling of the cars and the way they play, because let me tell you, it's not good. So in terms of controls, Burnout Legends is fairly simple. You hold A to go, you hold B to brake, you use the D-pad to steer, you can press X to look behind you, and the right bumper button is your boost. Sounds easy, right? Well, wrong, idiot. It's not. Burnout Legends has many problems, but one of the biggest issues is the fact that there's no real drift mechanic. There's no button to start drifting. It just kind of sometimes does. When you turn into a corner and you turn long enough, it kind of turns into a drift, but the problem is you have to overcompensate for this by turning so early that it requires pixel perfect precision every corner, which is just not possible when you've got other racers and AI traffic around as well. Excluding maybe the 2 Formula 1 cars in the game, pretty much most of the cars feel the same handling wise, and they all feel like bricks on wheels. Turning around corners is just the most painful thing you could possibly ever experience, and it just really shouldn't be. As I was playing some of the tracks in the game, especially the ones from Burnout 3 because those are the ones I've spent the most time with, I kind of thought, wow, I don't remember these tracks being this hard. And the reason being is because in Burnout 3 you can actually turn the fucking car. So first of all, you've just got your standard race across any of the tracks with a few other racers at a time. The first thing you'll do in the World Tour is play a race, and immediately this is where the cracks start to show, less than like a minute into your playthrough. 2 more glaring issues became immediately apparent to me once I actually started playing the game, and one of those is that the AI are really stupid. They just crash into anything, and the cars take ages to respawn as well, so you're very likely to just crash through no fault of your own because they're just blocking the whole road. The other, and I would say more irritating issue, is the collision detection in this game is probably the worst that I've ever seen in a racing game. It is terrible. About 30 seconds into my first ever race, I went past a bus, probably leaving the safe minimum distance that you would in the real world, and I just flipped. Just crashed, that was it. And I had no idea why.
That's quite big.
And bearing in mind, one of the mechanics in this game to get boost is to have near misses with traffic. How do you do that? You'd have to swerve like 10 meters around anything, because personally I'd be way too scared to go even a little bit close to any of the other cars. Anyway, more on the collision detection later. So the race, they're just standard, typically 3 laps, nothing really else to say. It just feels like a poor man's imitation of Burnout 3, which is pretty much the same for the entire game. Anyway, next up, and very similar to race, we have the Eliminator, which is just the standard race, but whoever's in last after each lap is eliminated. That's it. No different, same problems. Moving on. Next up we have Face Off, which pits you up against one of the legend cars in the game for a one-on-one. These are typically 2 laps long, but still follow the standard race procedures, but at the very least, at the end, you do get to unlock a cool car.
Yes!
So next up we have the Burning Lap, and that is the time trial mode that lets you try out a bunch of different cars before you actually unlock them, such as the F1 car, the hot rods, so on and so forth. And these used to be a fairly decent challenge in Burnout 3, but here, half the fun of getting to use the hot rod early on a burning lap was to learn how it handled, play the game a bit differently, but here it just handles pretty much exactly the same as every other car in the game. So yeah, it's still hard because you're still dealing with the terrible steering. The burning laps in Burnout Legends have the same postcard unlock system as they did in Burnout 3. When you get all the postcards, you get a car. Anyway, moving on, next up we have the ever iconic Road Rage, my all-time favourite game mode in Burnout, and to be honest, one of my favourite game modes just ever. I love it, I love Burnout. And you'll be pleased to know that here... No, I'm just kidding, it's terrible. It really doesn't work. This game purely relies on the collision detection that just doesn't work. The only way, and I mean this, the only way you are guaranteed to get a takedown when you ram into a car is if you boost directly straight without steering into the back of the car, and that should just about take them out straight away. If you go at a slight angle, it will for some reason think you're on the side of the car and steer them either way, but 9 times out of 10 they won't hit the barrier that you're trying to hit them into anyway. So if you want to complete the road rages fast, just go into the back of the cars. Yes, you probably won't get your signature takedowns, but at least you can actually get through the game. It's a shame because there are small glimpses of a good game here, especially in the road rage mode, because on the odd moment that the collision detection actually works properly, you get some very satisfying takedowns. And just as a side note, the signature takedowns are exactly the same as they were in Burnout 3 Takedown. There's just less of them. Anyway, Road Rage typically has a 3-minute timer, and to get gold for most of the game you have to get 10 takedowns until you get to the Supercar Leagues and you have to get 12. If you want to play the Road Rage mode in this game without the time limit, you can do it as a single event instead, and then it's just until you run out of health. Okay, so next up we've got my least 2 favourite modes in the game. Firstly, we have Pursuit, which has you playing as a police car and you just have to chase down and crash out one single car. But unfortunately, because this game mode would be very easy if you could just take them out in one hit, they have a health bar and you can't really crash them into anything, and at numerous points as you drive around the track, you will quite blatantly see the car you're chasing just drive through cars and get no damage. It won't even be afflicted. It's like it ghosts its way through stuff. Very weird. The best way to play this game is to just grind alongside the car you're chasing down, because that gets the health down drastically. Don't waste your time boosting, ramming. Just grind alongside it. It'll be a much easier experience for you. Anyway, they're not designed to be very long, but Pursuit is probably the least fun I had in this game, and that's saying something because I didn't really have much fun with this game at all. But again, on the plus side, once you do it, you do unlock the police car from that category. However, the one annoying thing about the police car is that no matter what game mode you use the police car in, the siren is stuck on permanently. So if you happen to do a Grand Prix with the police car, for 3 races back to back, you are stuck with a siren that you cannot turn off. Anyway, the last game mode is of course the crash mode. It's never been my personal favourite across any of the Burnout games. I've always enjoyed the high-speed crashy racing a lot more, but it functions fine here, I guess. The same issues with collision detection are very apparent here. However, the other thing that's quite apparent here is that the physics engine doesn't really work either, because you could tap into a car and you'll either fly away into the distance or you just won't move. It's very weird. Speaking of the physics, just as a general point across this game, it feels like they've doubled or even tripled the amount of gravity pushing you down, because at various points in maps on Burnout 3 where you would have taken off into the air, you just cling to the ground like you've been stuck to it. It's very weird. I mean, maybe that's a good thing because the game is already unpredictable enough. I don't think I'd want to start flying about in the air as well. Anyway, there's only one other game mode outside of World Tour, and that's just standard time attack that you can do on any track, as opposed to the burning laps. Nothing notable, it's just a time attack mode. Now, on top of this, Burnout Legends also featured some multiplayer modes that unfortunately I wasn't able to test, but they did make use of the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. So you had 3 options to choose from. You had a challenge race, where you could play against a friend in an attempt to collect their collector car. There's Double Impact, where you both fight for crash money and use crash breakers to help defeat each other. And then Party Crash. You can play solo or in teams. And that's for up to 6 players, so good luck finding 5 other friends who also own Burnout Legends. Or in my case, good luck finding 5 other friends. Now, whilst these multiplayer modes do sound good, what's quite frustrating is that there's actually a few cars that are locked behind the multiplayer. There are collector's cars in this game, and for each class there are 5 collector's cars. One of the collector's cars from each class can be earned in the World Tour at random, whilst the other 4 can only be earned in multiplayer. So if you don't have any friends to play with, you can't 100% get every car in the game. Tough luck, buddy. Sucks to be lonely, I guess. Anyway, so let's focus a little bit further on that collision detection. So there are 2 very frustrating things about the collision detection in this game. One is the uncertainty of whether or not you've cleared enough space around a vehicle to get a near miss and to not crash. And the other is when you do crash, because of this wonky detection, the game respawns you in the most ridiculous places. If you crash into a wall going sideways, it might just respawn you back in the wall. If you crash behind another car, or you're near another AI vehicle, it will respawn you and you will immediately crash again. There's just zero thought or effort put into these mechanics that they've just copied from Burnout 3. There was a masterpiece sat right there. Just do what they already did. I don't understand why that's so hard. If you are a big fan of the first few entries in the series and then you play this, firstly, I'm sorry. But second of all, I just had this uncanny feeling the entire time. I knew in my head I was playing Burnout, but it didn't feel quite like Burnout. Sure, you had the crashes, and when you did crash, you could somewhat control your car in the air to try and get an aftertouch takedown. It has all the looks and the supposed mechanics of Burnout, but it just doesn't feel right. Anyway, so as you probably saw at the start of this video, Burnout Legends on the DS did not review very well. The PSP version holds a very, very respectable 86 out of 100 on the Metacritic platform, but the DS version, 38 out of 100. Much, much worse. The user score for the PSP version is also 8.6 out of 10, so very consistent, but the DS user score is a little bit higher than its 38, with a 5.1 out of 10, putting it up into the mixed or average. Still not great. So how well would Burnout Legends go on to sell? Well, the PSP version was a massive hit, selling just shy of 1 million copies, and I believe eventually would end up on the PlayStation Network as well, so you could digitally download this. History did not repeat for the DS version, however. The game would still sell okay, It would go on to sell just shy of 200,000 copies, with the vast bulk of those being in America. These stats are from VG charts. Overall, Burnout Legends for the DS left me feeling like I'd been on a night out and had one too many. I felt dizzy, confused, tired, and sick. Anyway, that's enough trashing Burnout No, I'm just kidding. It's time to rank the game. There is only one tier that's possibly fitting for Burnout Legends, and unfortunately that's gonna have to be pure evil. Yes, you will be joining FlatOut 3 for also disrespecting your fantastic franchise. Do I think this game is as bad as FlatOut 3? I don't really know, but as I'm a bigger fan of the Burnout franchise, this one feels more personally insulting to me. Now, I have seen some positivity about this game online from people who grew up with this, so I'm very sorry if I have offended you with this. Your opinion of this game is completely valid, and I'm really glad you enjoyed it. It just isn't for me. So yeah, Burnout DS, pure evil.
2006 was a year that saw numerous iconic racing game releases: Outrun 2006, Cars, FlatOut 2, and Need for Speed Carbon. 2006 was also a year that saw the release of Drag Racer USA for the PlayStation 2. Now, if you've never heard of this one, consider yourself lucky. The sacred wheel of worst racing games has bestowed Drag Racer USA upon us. I'm sure this will be fun, right? Now, before we jump into the gameplay of Drag Racer, let's go over a bit of history about the game. Drag Racer USA was developed by a company called Mere Mortals, who don't appear to have anything particularly notable in their back catalogue. The publisher, on the other hand, is Phoenix Games. I have been fortunate enough to not cover any Phoenix games on the channel so far, but it would seem my luck has now run out. Phoenix Games were known for publishing dozens upon dozens of shovelware titles such as Dalmatians 3, The Toys Room, and Turbo Trucks. Yikes. And when I say shovelware, I mean shovelware, like being hit very hard on the head with a shovel. So after you've booted the game up and have been threatened by the Phoenix Games logo, you are greeted by an aggressively mediocre looking menu. It's certainly not the worst I've ever seen, but it also feels like there has been zero effort put in outside of make it look like a 2000 Street Racer menu. I will say though, the loading screen just says loading, but the O is a wheel spinning around, so that's kinda cool I guess, even if the wheel is comedically larger than the rest of the word. So the game gives you three options: single player, two player, or the options. Seeing as I have no friends and there's basically no options to change, I hopped into single player. I was hoping that the game would have some kind of tutorial or explanation as to how it works, but much like my dad coming back, that never happened. So I figured that practice would be a good place to start and figure out the controls. Thankfully, there aren't too many controls to wrap your head around, so it didn't take too long to figure it out. So those controls are as follows: X to accelerate, left analog stick to steer, although D-pad is also an option, and then you shift gears using the left and right bumpers. As far as I can tell, there is no option to change perspective, nor to look behind you, but hey, it's not like the AI is going to ram straight into the back of me. Whoa, what the Yeah, so the AI in this game are savages, and really completely broken. No matter how upgraded your car is, the AI will always out-accelerate you for a while, presumably just to make the race feel like more of an actual race. It feels very far from an actual race, however, as you can just use the AI to boost you ahead. If they hit into the back of you, they don't even slow down, they just speed you up, so if you want to grind out races for cash, just use that technique. So what is the handling like in Drag Racer USA? Well, I'll give you a guess. It is really not good. The game has absolutely no sense of speed, the acceleration feels whack, and then suddenly, even though the game feels slow, you spin out and crash easily. The crashes are kind of funny though, so that's something. On the plus side, the AI also crashes out, but through the power of total bullshit, they recover just fine. There was one race where I was overtaken and the AI crashed out but spun towards the finish line like a Beyblade. Just absolutely ridiculous. Now, I briefly mentioned upgrades earlier, so let me just elaborate on that a bit. Yes, the game features an upgrade system, and no, it's not really good. You can upgrade your engine, tyres, suspension, and your gearbox each 5 times. Honestly, none of the upgrades feel like they do anything until they are fully upgraded, and then it just makes the car even more undrivable than it previously was. My little box was reaching speeds of nearly 190 miles per hour, but felt like I was on a drive to do my weekly shop at Morrison's.
Maniac. Maniac. Maniac.
So in terms of content within the game, there really isn't that much on offer. There is practice mode where you drive the tracks by yourself, single race, self-explanatory, and then the championship cups where you play through the few tracks that the game has to offer. Each race earns you a couple hundred credits to spend on either upgrades or a new car. There are only 5 cars overall. Each track is incredibly simple, with the most exciting thing to happen across any of them being a jump. But as the physics are such ass, the jump doesn't even work properly anyway. Now I'm sure you've noticed already, but visually Drag Racer USA is somewhat of a massive pain on the eyes to look at. This is a 2006 game, but honestly it looks a good 5 years older at least, and that's putting it nicely. The levels are all incredibly dark and dreary, the car models are as mediocre as they come, looking like overbaked Hot Wheels more than actual cars. Also, half the time the sky looks like Armageddon is upon us. Not sure if that was intentional or not, but there we go. I would just like to take a second to read you guys the official description on Metacritic for this game, as it really did make me chuckle. So here we go. Feel all 600 plus brake horsepower shake through your body as the engine roars at a touch of the throttle. Get your hands on the wheel and gear shifter firmly, eyes locked on the lights. With extreme concentration, watch the lights go from red to orange to green. Dump the clutch and launch your car to perfection. Hear and feel the tyres screech as all of your car's power rushes through them, leaving behind nothing but a big cloud of burnt rubber, while you struggle to keep the car going where you want it to. Keep your eye on the finish line. This is definitely the game where you get to master your tunnel vision as you become a real drag racer. Wasn't that just wonderful? The only thing drag about this game is how it drags on. Now I have tried to find some critic reviews from the time to show off how poorly it scored, but I couldn't find a single one. So we will refer to the user score on Game FAQs, which for some reason has an average user score of 2.9 out of 5. Why is that so high? There is such a divide in the scores. 50% of users gave it 4 out of 5, but then 25% gave it 0.5 out of 5. What were those 50% of users on whilst playing this game? Maybe it's best to leave that question unanswered. On top of this, I wasn't able to find any sales figures for the game, but based on it being a budget shovelware PS2 title in 2006, we can safely assume it didn't make much money. Hopefully. Just out of curiosity, I hopped onto price charting to see what the game is currently valued at. A still in box copy is worth about £6, whilst a brand new sealed copy is only worth 12. That would probably indicate that the sales were not great. So now the time has come to rank Drag Racer USA on our worst racing games tier list. Now, whilst I don't think this was as terrible as last week's Action Girlz Racing, I still think this game is very deserving of the pure evil tier. The handling is terrible, the physics are terrible, there's very little content even for a budget title. The grind to unlock more cars is also very tedious and unnecessary just to top it all off. Overall, Shovelware Racer USA is exactly what you'd expect from a Phoenix Games title. No fun, no quality, and about as much enjoyment and satisfaction as stepping on a Lego brick in the dark. Hot Wheels, iconic orange tracks, gravity-defying loops, and tiny cars we all launched across our living rooms. But in 2013, Hot Wheels took the chaos to consoles in Hot Wheels World's Best Driver, a colourful, chaotic arcade racer that promised speed, stunts, and split-second thrills. So, was it a hidden gem, a forgotten flop, or something in between? Let's hit that iconic orange track and find out. World's Best Driver released in September of 2013.
The game was released on PS3, Xbox 360, Wii U, and the 3DS, with an iOS port coming early 2014, being developed by Firebrand Games. Firebrand is a developer that we've looked at before on this channel, as they have developed some DS versions of various licensed games, including Cars 2, SpongeBob's Boating Bash, Trackmania, Dirt 2, and Cartoon Network Racing, just to name a few. They are also the developers behind the awful Fast and Furious Showdown, which is another game that's on the racing wheel, but yet to be chosen. Anyway, the game was published by Warner Bros. Interactive. So what can you actually do in World's Best Driver? Well, the answer is drive. Obviously, what game did you think we were playing? Sarcasm aside, World's Best Driver is split into 4 different play types. There are 4 different Hot Wheels teams, consisting of green, red, blue, and yellow. Very creative. Each team focuses on a different style of driving. So the green team focuses on speed, red focuses on stunts, blue team focus on drifting, and the yellow on destruction. Each team has a few different events that you can partake in, so I'll just break it down team by team. So let's start with the green team, also known as Speed. The first of these events is Time Trial, which seems like the most logical place for this event to be. These time trials usually take place across 2 laps rather than 1, so you just have to complete the 2 laps within a certain time limit. For every single event across World's Best Driver, there are 3 medals you can get per event depending on how well you do, and these medals count towards your progression in the game, unlocking more events as you go. Anyway, the next green team event is an event where you have to chase a ghost. That's the whole thing. The quicker you catch up to the ghost, the more medals that you get. When I first played this event, I was completely oblivious to what the actual objective was, so when I caught up to the ghost and the event just ended, I was very confused. Some Disney stuff. There's quite a lot in there. Here we are, come on, we're gonna do... Oh. How did I pass? Is that it? I must have done terribly the first time around. There is also an event type where you have to try and get to the fastest speed possible, usually going in a straight line, sometimes around the track, but once again I had no idea what was actually happening when I first played this event. Oh my god, oh my god, oh! Oh my god! How is that pass? And that's pretty much all the green team has to offer. Each team has 6 stages of events, and each stage has 3 events, except the final one, which has an extreme duel as well. These extreme duels see you doing ridiculous things such as racing a giant snowball or a fighter jet. Okay, so next up we have the blue team, which focuses on drifting and precision driving. So the most obvious event choice for this team is a drift score mode, where you have to drive around and chain up as many drifts as you can without hitting into anything. And I'm not gonna lie, it took me a lot longer than it should have to realise there was a functioning handbrake button, because I swear there were times where I was pressing X and it wasn't doing anything. Anyway, eventually I got quite good at this and started to get the top scores. As well as regular drift, there is also wall drift, which is exactly what it sounds like. You drive up a ramp at a high speed onto a wall, drift round and come down a ramp on the other side. I, for the life of me, could not get the hang of this at first, and again eventually got there in the end, but this just felt a bit stupid to me. It's intended to be cool, but its implementation in this game just isn't good, and the physics aren't that great, so it doesn't really work that well. So next up we have Parachute Precision. This is a mode where you get boosted off at a high speed, then you have to open a parachute and close the parachute within enough time to let your car roll to the end of the track and come to a halt before you hit the barriers or fall off the edge. Sounds easy-ish on paper. I was terrible at this, and to be honest, I never really got any better at it. It just took a lot of attempts. Next up, we have a game mode called Tightrope Run, which sounds quite interesting, and honestly, it kind of was. It's very precision car driving on a thin bit of track with no barricades on it. Essentially, it's like Hot Wheels Roblox Obby. It requires careful and precise driving, and honestly was kind of fun. The final mode featured for the blue team is a mode called Platform Hop, which sees you on a motorbike, well, hopping across platforms, doing precision stunts, and just collecting as many of the objectives as you possibly can. Again, this one was kind of fun, but it's not particularly clear where you're meant to go, and sometimes the physics really let you down. So next up we have the yellow team, which was primarily focused on destruction but had a couple of other things going for it as well. So the first event type that I played on the yellow team was an event called Hill Climb, which does exactly what it says on the tin. You hop in a car and you climb up a hill and try and get to the top in the fastest possible time. The handling is all over the place, and there are parts of the environment that you can't drive on without being slowed down, but the game does not do a very good job at distinguishing what is and isn't something you can drive on quicker. Next up we had an event called Crash Course, which sees you hop in a giant monster truck and you have to crush as much as you possibly can to get the highest score within the time limit provided. This is, well, short and sweet. It's satisfying to crush down on stuff, but sometimes the scoring is a bit ridiculous. Nonetheless, it was a fun little challenge and a welcome addition to this very strange game. Next up we have one of the weirdest things I think I've ever played in a racing game, at least in a Hot Wheels racing game, and that is Push Challenge. Because yes, that's right, your objective is to literally push as many inanimate objects as you can off the edge to score the highest score possible. This can involve crates, missiles, parts of a plane, really, the world's your oyster. I really don't know why this is even in the game. It's not particularly fun, it's very slow paced, and it's quite harsh to get the best scores possible. There is an ability you can activate after getting a high enough score or pushing enough off that makes your car a bit stronger, but still, it doesn't make it any more enjoyable. The yellow team missions are like the weirdest mix of missions in the game. In terms of pacing, they're all over the place, and some of them are just so boring. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, then comment the classic Hot Wheels phrase, "beat that," in the comments down below. So our final team that we're looking at is the red team, which focuses on stunts. So the first event type that I played on the red team was called Gauntlet, which was like an obstacle course, if the obstacle course was out to kill you. Anyway, you just have to complete a lap and move on, that's it. It's funny, but only because of how stupidly broken it is. Ninjago battles. I had a weird Lego, like a forgotten Lego DS games video. What? So next up we had an event type called Freestyle, where you just have to score points by pulling off different tricks that you freestyle. These can include cartwheels, backflips, jumps, so on and so forth. You can do this in a car, a bike, a snowmobile, and honestly could have been one of the highlights of the game if it weren't for the stupid physics engine and how hard it is to control any vehicle that you're in the air. If you're a kid-friendly game that's encouraging you to perform stunts in the air, don't make it so fucking hard to perform stunts in the air. Next up we have Downhill Drop, which sees you in a bike driving down a hill whilst also having to perform stunts by jumping off of ramps. The timings in this are incredibly unfair and harsh, and it's nigh on impossible to get the score for all 3 possible medals without doing something cheesy like sitting at the finish line and doing a wheelie to get your multiplier up. Next up I played the Wall of Death, which is you riding a bike or a car around the wall over and over and avoiding pillars rising from it, so you can get on there for the longest time possible and get all 3 medals. To be fair, this one was pretty entertaining because A, it doesn't last long, and B, it isn't broken. And that takes us through every single team and all of their event types. So with every game mode covered, how does the game actually handle and play? Well, the controls are pretty much standard controls for a modern racing game: left analog stick to steer and your triggers to accelerate and brake. I eventually figured out that the handbrake was tied to the X button, or square if you're playing on PlayStation, and that's pretty much all there is to it. The handling itself varies from incredibly grippy to ridiculously slidey at a moment's notice, with an accompanying physics engine that just doesn't work very well. The problem is when you have really middling controls and handling as well as a bunch of half-baked game modes, you're already in for a bad time. I haven't even got to the rest of it yet. So let's talk sound design, because oh my god, the music in this game is horrible. There are times where it doesn't even sound like music. On top of this, each team has their own commentator that talks to you and tells you when you're doing well and tells you when you're doing bad, but the problem is they tell you that way too often and just don't shut up. Now, I know you can turn these things off, but why bother making these things in the first place if you're just going to make them really annoying? On top of this, the game visually just looks absolutely horrible. There is nothing nice about it. The colours look really washed, the shadows look rubbish, the environments look rubbish. And if we bear in mind this launched in 2013, the same year as some real heavy hitters on the racing scene such as Gran Turismo 6, Forza Motorsport 5, and Need for Speed Rivals, and then you look at this, and you just want to bleach your eyes. In fact, Angry Birds Go released in 2013 for mobile, and the game still looks better than this. And yes, part of me knows it's not fair to compare to some of those big heavy hitters like Gran Turismo, but with a massive brand like Hot Wheels, you'd think some time, care, and attention would be spent on making the game look and play nice. I mean, look at Hot Wheels Unleashed that we got a few years back. That's a Hot Wheels game that looks really pretty, but you know, is still fun. So how would the game hold up in terms of its critical response? Well, for reference, today we have been looking at the PC version of the game, but it's pretty much identical to the PS3, Wii U, and Xbox 360 versions. The 3DS version is practically the same, it just runs a hell of a lot worse and looks worse than this. Anyway, the PC version on Metacritic has one single review, putting it at a 40 out of 100, which is really not good. The PS3 version is exactly the same, with the Wii U version going 10 points lower with 30 out of 100, with user scores for the game sitting between about 3 to 5, so really not good at all. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to find any sales figures for this game at all, except for some rough estimations, so if I had to guess, I would say this game probably across the board sold about 100,000 copies. So not amazing, but enough to make the money back on what it cost to develop the game, which I would imagine is probably not very much. Anyway, now the time has come where we have to rank Hot Wheels World's Best Driver on our tier list of worst racing games. Now, this was the first worst racing game in the series that I played and recorded the footage for live on stream, so that did change my experience just a little bit because I got to experience it with some of you guys. So let's not beat around the bush here, this game is not deserving of a place any higher than rubbish, but because of the entertainment value I had from some of the sheer ridiculousness this game had on offer, I'm gonna have to make this the first entry in so bad that it's actually kind of good. It's not quite pure evil levels of Need for Speed Most Wanted DS or FlatOut 3, but make no mistake, this is definitely not a good game. Pop it on with some friends and laugh at the stupid physics and some of the really horrific crashes, and move on with your life. What happens if you take a terrible developer and an iconic franchise and throw it at the Nintendo DS? Well, you get Need for Speed Most Wanted DS. That's what you get. Now, I opened this series with the PSP port of Most Wanted 510, and then I was flooded with comments telling me that the DS version is worse. And you know what? Fair play, guys, because you were absolutely correct. This is definitely worse. So this version of Most Wanted, released in November 2005, was of course again published by EA, and this time was developed by Sensory Sweep Studios. The developer behind such iconic titles as Alvin and the Chipmunks, Jackass the Game, My Spanish Coach, and Major League Eating the Game. Definitely fills me with confidence for this one. So to start off with, the game gets you to create a driving license, so my full official government name is End Me, and my signature is a sad face, which perfectly summarizes my experience with this game. And from there, it's time to choose my first car. So we went with the Chevrolet Cobalt SS, and it actually looks okay on this menu here. Until you get in the game. So I jumped straight into career mode to see what this fantastic part of Need for Speed history had to offer. And the answer was not very much. So before I break down what the career mode actually features, let's talk about the handling of the cars in this game. Oh boy. Last week I played Burnout Legends and boldly claimed that this could be the worst racing game on the DS. But here we have a very, very strong contender. So the controls are as follows. You hold A to accelerate, you steer with the D-pad, and then B and the right bumper act as your handbrake. There doesn't really appear to be a normal brake, because why would there be? Then you can look behind you using the left bumper, and that's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, with controls as simple as that, the game just has to be easy, right guys? Right? No, the handling is just oversensitive. Genuinely, the smallest tap of the D-pad can cause you to just turn and swerve into a wall. Much like Burnout Legends on DS, this game also suffers with ridiculous collision detection. Not quite as bad as Burnout did, but it's still quite apparent in this game. So now we've laid the groundwork for what a fun experience I'm about to have, let's go through what the career mode actually has to offer. So if I were a game developer, which for the record I'm not, but if I were, then I'd want to make the opening of my game exciting, attention-grabbing, fun, literally anything else. But the absolute legends at Sensory Sweep Studios decided to have the first mission of the career mode be a time trial. And not just a 1-lap time trial, no, a 2-lap time trial. So you get to spend twice as long on a terrible track. So yeah, there are 2 types of time trials in the career mode. You've got your standard 1-lap time trials, and then just to really wind you up and drag the game out, you've also got 2-lap time trials. These vary in difficulty depending on the level of traffic and the level of police activity, but for the most part these time trials are absolutely fine, and your biggest challenge will always be fighting the game itself with the handling of your car. So moving on, next up there are 3 different types of races in this game. So there are your standard circuit races, which can be 3 or 4 laps, and again can vary in difficulty depending on the volume of traffic and the volume of police activity. And this is also where you'll get your first taste of the AI races, and honestly, they're not terrible. They're certainly not the worst racers I've faced in a DS handheld racing game, but they're also not particularly good either. The biggest issue, to be honest, is how they can slow you down at the start of the race. Because of how poor the collision detection is, even if you are inches behind your opponent in front, you will bounce off them and slow right down, and this happens quite frequently, and can make overtaking a nightmare, because you have to leave quite a big gap. See, now this problem wouldn't be quite as bad if you weren't already fighting against the car itself that you're driving. Anyway, on top of circuit racing, you've also got the Eliminator race, which is always quite a decent game mode, and is still the same here. It's just circuit racing, but at the end of each lap, someone gets eliminated. Now again, this would be more fun, but the problem is, if you make one mistake, which you're very likely to do with the game you're playing, then there's basically next to no chance of catching up. That's it, you may as well just restart. The third of these racing game modes is the point-to-point racing, and these are the shortest and honestly the most fun out of the 3. It's a quick burst race where you go around a part of the track and it's the first to the finish line. I think honestly it's the most fun just purely because it's the shortest, but still kind of fun nonetheless. And last of all, we have Barricade. And no, I'm not talking about that cool Decepticon from Transformers. I'm talking about a police game mode. This is, by a landslide, the worst game mode in Most Wanted DS. You have to race through a section of the track as kind of a time trial, but there's a bunch of police barricades with various ways to pass through them, scattered over the track. Now, 2 things make this game mode particularly frustrating, and that is the poor handling of the cars and the terrible collision detection. There are quite a few times I reached the final checkpoint on one of these barricade modes, and I definitely didn't hit the police car, but it just goes busted and tells me it's over and I have to restart. On top of this, some of the barricades are unfairly placed on corners, and it's very hard to get through them in a decent amount of time because you have to slow right down to pass through, because you can't risk sliding around on a corner. And that's basically everything the career mode has to offer. To be honest, on paper it's quite a nice little varied lineup, but the career mode itself throughout every single chapter has an over-reliance on time trials. If this wasn't a game about street racing, I wouldn't have a problem with that, but this entire game is about illegal street racing and police chases, and the main game mode that they keep presenting you with is time trial or multi-lap time trial. Why? Probably because it's the only time the game f***ing works properly. So in terms of gameplay, yeah, Need for Speed Most Wanted DS isn't that good. But how is it in terms of design? Spoiler alert, obviously it's bad. So, as I briefly mentioned earlier, the game really lulls you into a false sense of security at the start. It shows you some semi-decent models of some cars, you pick one, and then when you get into the game, oh damn, yeah, it's not pretty. So in-game when you're racing, the car models are absolutely horrendous. In fact, it's very strange because the pedestrians driving about just as part of the level genuinely look better than the cars you're racing in and against. At one point I looked down at the bottom screen to see it saying that my opponent was driving a Golf, to which I looked up and thought, how in any way, shape or form does this car resemble a Golf? It just looks like we handed a toddler a piece of paper and said, draw a car. Even for a 2005 DS game, this looks rough. Burnout Legends looks better than this did, and that came out a couple of months beforehand. On top of the ugly car models, the actual backgrounds that you're racing against also look horrible. The track designs are terrible, the visuals are terrible. Just overall, this is a very unattractive game. I would compare it to that of a PS1 title, but then I feel like I'd be insulting the PS1, so what's the point? Now, every version of Most Wanted except the DS and GBA versions had licensed soundtracks, and those games really benefited from that. The DS version, on the other hand, has an original soundtrack that just doesn't sound very good. I mean, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard, don't get me wrong, but it's just painfully mediocre. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting a masterpiece, but surely they could have done something a bit more stimulating on the ears than this. Anyway, before I talk about the response to Most Wanted DS, we do just have to talk a little bit more about the developer of this game, Sensory Sweep Studios. Because oh boy, there's a story here that's honestly more interesting than the game itself. So a couple of years after Most Wanted released, it would come to light that Sensory Sweep and its founder, Dave Rushton, were being taken to court. It turns out that developers working for Sensory Sweep were owed over $2 million in wages. This would not get resolved until October of 2012, where Dave Rushton was jailed for 12 months and ordered to pay just $1.2 million. On top of this, however, he'd already been in trouble previously for failing to pay taxes and for accounts of racketeering. So if I had to guess as to why this version of Most Wanted and a lot of other Sensory Sweep games were as bad as they were, it's because their founder was channeling the funds meant for the game elsewhere. Anyway, I have no idea what Mr. Rushton's up to these days, but hopefully he's staying well away from video game development. So after all the chaos surrounding Need for Speed Most Wanted DS, what was the actual reaction to it? Well, not great. The game holds a very sad 45 out of 100 on Metacritic, with the highest review score being 60 from Nintendo Power, where they've said, solid, but it could have been so much more. Which I wholeheartedly disagree with the solid part. For once, however, I do actually agree with what IGN had to say about it. The game just doesn't gel at all, control is bad, objectives are confusing, and the visuals don't come anywhere near what EA did with the previous DS Need for Speed game. So yeah, not great. For context, the PSP version of this game, which I opened this series with, held about 70 out of 100. Now, how would Most Wanted go on to sell? So for context, the very average PSP port sold over 2 million copies, and collectively across all the home console variants, we had over 15 million copies sold. The DS version, however, sold 250,000. So not fantastic. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's certainly not great either. Just for reference, these sale figures are from VG charts. So now the time has come to rank this game. There's no other spot on this tier list other than pure evil for this game. When I first started playing, I was thinking this could be a so bad it's good, but the further I got into the game, the more I started to dislike it. I would argue that Most Wanted DS is as bad as, if not worse than Burnout Legends DS, so it's got to stay in the bottom tier. The PS2 is no stranger to terrible racing games, from seminal classics such as Big Rigs Over-the-Road Racing, to more niche experiences such as Taxi 3. But in September of 2005, a new challenger entered the ring.
Action Girlz Racing, and yes, that is girls with a Z. So before we get into the gameplay, let me just give you a bit of history about the game. Action Girlz Racing seemingly spawned from the depths of who knows where in September of 2005. The game was developed by Data Design Interactive, who you may know for such quality titles like Ninja Bread Man or Rock and Roll Adventures. Data Design really has one of the worst reputations for poor quality titles across the whole industry, which is really saying a lot because we've played some absolute garbage during this series. The most embarrassing part for me about Data Design Interactive is that they're English. So on behalf of England, I apologise for Data Design Interactive. Anyway, enough about the background, let's dive into the game. So the first thing you'll notice is that the loading screen looks, well, not great, and the menu looks even poorer. I was hoping this wouldn't be a sign of things to come, but let's just get into a race.
3, 2, 1, go!
How is it so slow? Now I know this is 50cc, but come on man, this is absolutely ridiculous. People drive in car parks and park faster than this. Anyway, more on that later. So in terms of controls, it's fairly straightforward: accelerate with X, brake with square, even if the brake barely works. If you want to use the very limited items this game has to offer, you can press triangle. Steering is done with the left analog stick, and you can look behind you with L2, and you can also use L1 to change to the bumper view, but for some reason this point of view is comically close to the ground, making driving from this point of view both very difficult but also very nauseating. There's absolutely no way that anyone at Data Design got anyone to playtest this before release, because surely someone would have pointed that out, amongst other glaring issues. Now you're probably wondering, what even are the Action Girlz? Well, allow me to introduce them to you. After you've chosen your character, the loading screen will display a few characteristics such as their star sign, job, and signature catchphrase. For example, meet Bianca, a racing driver for a legally distinct Ferrari. Her star sign is Taurus if anyone is interested, and her catchphrase is get out of the fast lane. Honestly, that's one of the less ridiculous character bios we have, as we have Blossom, who looks like one of the 3 blind mice. Her signature catchphrase is remember the Beatles? Nah, never heard of them. Anyway, yeah, there are 8 of these wonderful Action Girlz to play as, each with their own unique catchphrases, which they never actually say in the game, or say anything at all for that matter. So let's get back into racing. As I mentioned earlier, 50cc is painfully slow, like really slow. There are a couple of tracks where a single lap in this 50cc can take 3 minutes, and there's 3 laps per race, which means you're looking at nearly 10 minutes for a race sometimes. So as well as having the 3 standard engine classes of 50, 100 and 150cc, the game also has 3 difficulty modes for the AI. Beginner, experienced, and advanced. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, because they're all quite broken. At certain points in a race, the AI will just magically speed up to a ridiculous extent that you just can't keep up with, and then they slow down again. I think the intention was to make it feel like a tense race, but the reality is that A, it looks broken, and B, it actually is broken. Sometimes they zoom off and there's absolutely no chance of you catching up, even after getting boost pickups. I refer to my previous statement about this game not being playtested. As well as the AI having a case of the zoomies, they also crash all the time, into each other, into walls, and rather frustratingly, into you as well. The issue is when someone collides with you, there's a good couple of seconds where your steering suddenly stops. Come on, Data Design, really? So you may end up sandwiched into a wall. Basically every single AI drives like Lance Stroll in the dry on steroids. It's just painful. Now the game has a simple unlock system, which means to unlock 100cc, you have to complete 3 cups of 50cc, each consisting of 4 races. The same applies with 100cc to 150, but at least 100cc is over a bit quicker due to the speed increase. Now, speaking of those cups, let's talk about the tracks. The game has about 5 tracks to offer, but pretends like it has 10, as they take those 5 tracks and change it from daytime to nighttime. That's literally it, nothing else. None of the tracks are particularly well designed, but mostly their biggest crime is being incredibly generic and boring. There is one track that gets you driving through a school. It's not great, but at least it was some different scenery. That's probably the nicest compliment Action Girlz Racing is going to get from me. Now, the game may have a nice variety of 8 characters, but for some unholy reason, every single car in the game is a smart car. They all drive a smart car, just in a different colour. No other options. The best part is these smart carts are definitely slower than their real-life counterparts. This is one of those rare games where truly nothing came together. I cannot think of a single redeeming quality that Action Girlz Racing has to offer that you can't find 10 times better in many other kart racers. Now, in terms of the visual design, the HUD that is on screen during races is just tacky. The bar that shows progression looks terrible and sometimes doesn't even sync up with where you're racing. The font that your position is shown in is terrible, just the whole layout is ugly. Speaking of ugly, the character models look like something out of old school Roblox, in the worst possible way, and the environments are incredibly depressing for a 2005 game. I can only imagine it was even more disappointing when this was ported to the Nintendo Wii 2 years later. It looked no different. Yes, the game may have the bright colours of a Nintendo game, but I'm pretty sure Nintendo would have sued themselves if they'd made this. And even though the game looks that bad, it still suffers from some fairly irritating frame rate drops. How? Action Girlz Racing seems to have just 2 pieces of music across the whole game. The menu music,
Racing.
generic, and the racing music, just as generic. The menu music I can get over, but this is a kart racer with just one single racing piece of music. At least give us 1 per track. Now, with this being a kart racer, of course there are power-ups. What power-ups are there, Cledge, I hear you ask? Well, dear viewer, the game has 2 projectiles, both of which are phones. Yes, phones. The homing projectile is a mobile flip phone, and the regular projectile is an old landline phone. There's also a shield that is an irritating umbrella that takes up too much of the screen, and then 2 different kinds of boost, one that surrounds you with mirrors, and one that's just a standard boost. The projectiles are insanely overpowered, as the hit animation takes way too long and also has no cooldown, so you can be hit numerous times in a row. But on the other hand, it is very satisfying to hit someone else and freeze them for several seconds. Whilst you can't hold more than 1 type of item, you can stack the same item up to 3 times, so once you've picked up the item, anytime you go through an item box, you'll get the same item, except the effects of it will last longer, or if it's a projectile, you'll have 2 or 3 of them. I just find it so insane that after hours of playing, writing, and thinking, I can't honestly think of one nice thing to say about this game. I don't even feel bad about it because this dev team clearly didn't care either. The game's box states that this is the only racing game made by girls for girls, which, whilst I can't officially confirm this, is more than likely not true. The whole thing is just a big scam. Now, I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you that Action Girlz Racing did not score well with critics. I wasn't able to find any proper PS2 version reviews, but IGN did review the Wii version and gave it a mere 0.8 out of 10. Should have gone lower in my opinion. The user score on Metacritic for this game is also the lowest I have seen on a game in this series, with a remarkably low 1.9 out of 10. The only sales figures I could find for the game were again for the Wii version, with VG charts stating that the Wii port only sold 10,000 copies. Yikes. If you are an owner of Action Girlz Racing on PC, PS2 or Wii, please let me know in the comments down below and let me know what you thought of the game when you bought it, especially if you genuinely thought it was going to be good. So now the time has come to rank Action Girlz Racing on our worst racing games tier list. If you hadn't guessed from my very positive attitude towards this game, Action Girlz Racing deserves no other place except pure evil. This is a game that doesn't even really deserve the title of game. It has barely any content, it looks horrible, it sounds horrible, and to top it all off, it plays horribly. The PlayStation 2 had a racing game for everyone. You had the stylish street racing of Need for Speed Underground, the chaotic city chases of Burnout, and even cool little experiments like Smuggler's Run. And then you had Taxi 3, based on a French film series that most people outside of Europe barely knew existed. This game promised high-speed thrills, but what it actually delivered was, well, we'll get to that. So what even is Taxi 3? Well, the game shares its name with a film of the same name. It's a French action comedy series, and every single one is called Taxi, insert number here. The game released exclusively in Europe in 2003 and was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft as well. The game released on PC, PS2, GameCube and the Game Boy Advance. Now, I did mention its Europe exclusivity, but I'm pretty sure this might have just released in France, not even across the whole of Europe. If you live outside of France and you got this game when it came out, please let me know, I'd love to hear about it. Anyway, the movie, to summarise, is about a taxi driver with a pretty souped up Peugeot who helps the police chase criminals. That's kind of it as far as I'm aware. I've never seen them, and the game makes no efforts to explain the plot to you whatsoever. Now, licensed movie tie-ins at the time were already infamous for being rushed cash grabs, but this one feels like they didn't even try. It's short, sloppy, and weirdly unfinished. And you know what? I'm not even surprised, because it is Ubisoft. So upon booting the game up, the first thing you'll notice is its incredibly ugly menu. It's a close-up shot of the back of the Peugeot 406 from the film, and you can cycle through your options that display on the license plate, which is a kinda cool idea, but it just looks really tacky. Then once you've selected your level, you'll then begin to notice that the load times stretch on for way too long. By the time you actually load in, you'll have forgotten what you were reading about the level you've chosen. And when it finally does drop you in, there's no countdown, no explanation or build up, the game just says go 3 times, quite abruptly.
Go! Go! Go!
Then when you start to drive, that you'll notice it's not just the menus that are ugly, it's the whole game. And not just 2003 graphics not aged well ugly, I'm talking worse than the PS1 ugly. Blocky buildings, flat textures, and no sense of life in the environments. It's been a while since we've had a proper stinker on worst racing games, but we're off to a really good start with this one. And then there's the handling. Oh boy, this might be some of the worst driving I've ever felt in a PS2 game. The car flip-flops between being hypersensitive and completely unresponsive. 1 second you're twitching at the slightest nudge of the stick, and the next you're sliding around like the road's covered in black ice. Seriously, it's completely ridiculous. Sometimes you can avoid all the oncoming traffic, sometimes you'll just smash through it because the game doesn't let you respond to it. Acceleration is also sluggish and awkward, and it feels like you go from 0 to 100 way too fast. Braking is completely useless because the second you lift off the accelerator, the car slows down quite a lot anyway, which means every corner feels like a coin flip between stopping dead or careening off into a wall. It's the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a game about fast cinematic chases that's literally from a movie. Instead, I felt like I was basically fighting against a physics experiment that had gone wrong. So what do you actually do in Taxi 3? Well, the answer is not very much. The game literally has 2 different game modes, and that is Scenario Mode and Taxi Mode, with Scenario Mode being the bulk of the game. So Scenario Mode is the game's story,
and it consists of about 10 missions that all take about 3 to 4 minutes each at a stretch. So most of those missions just consist of you passing checkpoints and getting extra time added to your clock until you reach the end. There's also a health bar to take note of in the bottom left, and if you damage your Peugeot too much, then it will be game over for you. And whilst that sounds easy enough, when you're wrestling with the game's terrible physics and handling, it is actually quite easy to stack up some damage on your car. So as well as this basically being a glorified time trial game, you do also get a couple of other mission types thrown in, usually in the same scenarios as your time trials. One of those is simply surpassing a certain speed limit when going past a speed camera, like in Forza Horizon. So barely a game mode, it's just something you have to kind of get past. And the other, in classic Ubisoft fashion, is missions where you have to follow people and not get caught. Which is very easy because unless you actually drive up and touch the car or bike that you're following, you can pretty much get away with sitting right up their arse. I just find it baffling that there's barely any variety. No interesting stunts, no clever set pieces. The police show up now and then, but they don't chase you, they don't block you. You just drive past them as if they're part of the general traffic, but they have their sirens on. They're more like moving sound effects than actual AI. So the game also features a mode called Taxi Mode, which just allows you to replay the levels without the additional objectives like speed traps and chases, to just get the fastest time possible. That's it, there's nothing else to it. So once you're done with all that, here's the real kicker. The whole game takes less than an hour to beat. And to be honest, if you manage to get everything pretty much perfect first time, you could probably do it in half an hour. You can literally complete Taxi 3 in less time than it takes to watch the film it's based on. And once you're done, the game gives you hard mode, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't do anything. There's no difference, there's no extras, no unlockables, no reason to go back. Unless, of course, you enjoy suffering. Now, as I mentioned, Taxi 3 is of course based on a film, so the likelihood is if you are playing this game, you probably have seen the film. But if, like me, you haven't, then oh boy, the cutscenes really are the cherry on top. They're all 2 to 5 seconds long, they have no dialogue and convey pretty much nothing. So if you haven't seen the film, you'll have absolutely no idea what's happening. Even if you have seen it, I would imagine that the story here, with the short cutscenes that they put in, which are all taken directly from the film by the way, barely connects together. It's like watching someone skip through a DVD by tapping the chapter button every 3 seconds. And then when you do quite quickly reach the end, it's so abrupt. You get one of these short few second cutscenes, and then the credits just show. I had no idea what I'd accomplished, what the character had achieved, why any of what I had just done mattered. That was it. Game over. What makes Taxi 3 even worse is the timing. In 2003, the PS2 was a goldmine for driving games. You had Need for Speed Underground, Burnout 2, and Crazy Taxi still making waves. I mean, when I went into this, I thought I was going to be playing a Crazy Taxi clone, and yet somehow this was still disappointing. All of those games nailed speed, style, and replayability. Meanwhile, Taxi 3 feels like a relic, and not in a good way. A bargain bin curiosity that somehow existed in the same generation. Where other games made you feel like a street racing legend, this one made you feel like, well, just completely miserable. It's just such a pointless game. Now, due to the very limited release of this game, I wasn't really able to find that many reviews, but a few French outlets gave it some very, very low scores. And again, due to this limited release, I was also not able to find any sales figures whatsoever about it. But we can safely assume that it didn't sell very well, and I hope that brings you some peace. So now the time has come where we have to rank Taxi 3 in our worst racing games tier list. Honestly, as soon as I'd finished the very first mission in this game, I knew there was no other tier for Taxi 3 other than pure evil. Normally in this series I can find at least one redeeming factor or positive note to make about the game, but this time I genuinely couldn't think of anything, other than the fact I was glad it was over quick. Now, if you want to play a game that has the word taxi and the number 3 in it, just go and play Crazy Taxi 3. Don't play this. In the end, Taxi 3 on PS2 is a perfect example of why licensed tie-ins had such a bad reputation. It's ugly, shallow, frustrating to play, and basically over before it even starts. The only thing fast about this game is how quickly you want to take it out of your console. So, should you play it today? Well, only if you're a collector, a masochist, or someone like me doing a retrospective video on bad PS2 games. For everyone else, this is definitely one Taxi that you can afford to miss. And there you have it, that is every racing game that I put in the pure evil or so bad that it's actually kind of fun category this year. Now, I started this series a few months into the year, otherwise there would of course have been 52 episodes this year, but next year, don't you worry, there'll be at least one episode every week. So thank you very much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the worst racing game series this year, and I look forward to bringing you much more into 2026. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support as always, and all I really have left to say is thank you, happy new year, and goodbye.